Alright, this game is a bit of a strange one. Today I'm going to be talking about Portal Fantasy. If you don't know what this game is, I don't really blame you. I didn't know anything about it until I launched the game for myself. Portal Fantasy is a turn-based creature collector RPG. It will be releasing on April 16th, and I can confidently tell you that this is one of the hardest games that I've ever had to review. Not because of the game's difficulty, but because I'm in kind of uncharted waters here. As a content creator, playing games before they are released is still a relatively new concept to me. For most games, when a developer gives you a key before the game's official release, it comes with what is called an embargo date. This means that you can't discuss the game or release any content based on the game until the embargo date passes. And to my surprise, Portal Fantasy didn't have one of those, which is wild because this is probably the earliest I've been able to play a game before its release. Made even more wild by the fact that what I played is not what I would call a very stable experience. I could have streamed this game if I wanted to, and I don't think people would have really liked what they saw. What makes this review so hard is that the version of the game that I experienced probably won't be the same as the one that you will experience should you choose to play this game. So yes, I was given a key for this game via Keymailer, and while I do not think that receiving this key affects my review in any way, I will always disclose to my audience whenever I receive a key for free, so you guys can make your own decisions on that. So initially I had front-loaded this review and this video with more of my initial experience with this game, but for the sake of people who just want the review, I'm just going to get this out of the way first, and then we will loop back around to the things that I had to go through to make this review. So I'm going to do my best to figure out what parts of the game you'll be experiencing playing the game versus what parts of the game I experienced. Which, to be fair, I don't think anyone who has media access should have been playing the version of the game that I did, especially without some kind of review guide explaining the circumstances of what the pre-release build of the game was like. So, review time. As I mentioned earlier, Portal Fantasy is a creature collector, and I might as well make the comparison now because there's no avoiding it ever. It feels very reminiscent of the older generation of Pokemon games, the Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and earlier than that. The main thing that Portal Fantasy does to set itself apart is probably the story of the game, which feels geared towards a more traditional fantasy RPG story. We are a wannabe Portal trainer. The creatures in this game are called Portals. It is what it is. We get lost in a storm on our way to the academy, and eventually we make it to the academy, but we are late to our first day of class, and all of our classmates have gone off on an excursion or something, I don't know. So instead of going off to classes and learning things like a normal kid at school, we're kind of just left to our own devices, doing random odd jobs and quests for people until the main plot kicks in. The most interesting part about the story is probably just kind of the world itself. It's got a bit of magic, it's got a little bit of political intrigue, it's got talking cats. Actually, what's the difference between a Portal and just like any other animal? I'm sure the game probably explains it somewhere. My point is that there is a lot going on. The tone of the writing, for the most part, is pretty tongue-in-cheek. From the dialogue to the descriptions of items and Portals, they're just kind of all filled with jokes. It's not really like laugh out loud funny, more like, nose exhale kind of funny, which is good enough. The story of the game is the main vehicle that enables us to, go on our adventure. If you were to ask me what it's actually about, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you. Not because I'm, not paying attention, but because after, 15 hours of the game, the main plot only really started to feel like it was actually going somewhere. There are different kingdoms and some of them don't like each other, and, Portal travel has kind of been shut down to certain places. There was a monster in one of the dungeons, and there's a robed figure stalking us, and someone we barely know almost got assassinated at one point. The assassination plot was the catalyst for the story actually starting to gain momentum. It's serviceable enough for the game, but I don't think it was extremely engaging. It wasn't so bad that I'd completely checked out either. So let's talk about the gameplay of Portal Fantasy. It has a lot of the creature collector tropes. Each Portal has elemental traits that make them strong or weak versus certain other traits. You have wild encounters by walking through thick grass, and you collect new creatures by, getting their health low and then using an item to capture them. All of the Portals have evolutions that, change their appearance and also make them stronger. It's pretty stock standard. So let's talk about what Portal Fantasy does a bit differently. First off, the combat. The combat is turn-based. It's a typical you attack and then the enemy can attack, but there is a stat that can allow a portable to potentially take more than one go in a row via whatever the agility or the speed stat it has. In a turn, a portable can take one action, a basic attack, a defend move, or they could use a skill or an item. There is also a rage mode that you can activate if you attack with your portable 5 times in a battle, which lets you somewhat bypass the turn order and, do more damage. Your portables have 2 resource bars, health, which does exactly what you think it does, and then there is momentum, which is the resource that your portables need to use skills. And momentum is gained by using the portable's basic attack, which means if you enter a battle, you can't just immediately start spamming skills. On top of that, portables can have passive abilities that change up the gameplay a little bit, like giving your team more crit chance or preventing enemy portables from gaining momentum for a certain amount of turns, or they could stop teams from switching their portables in and out. You can have up to 3 portables on your team, and the passives actually stack, so it gives that little bit of extra strategy to fights. With items, you are restricted to 5 slots of items and maxing out on stacks of 5 in those 5 item slots. Even with the restrictions, items in this game are pretty busted. More often than not, I was able to win fights that I really probably shouldn't have just by kind of spamming items and potions. Items are just a way too easy way to cheese yourself to victory in pretty much any circumstance, especially because if you are good with your exploration, you will always have plenty of items to use or enough currency to buy them if you don't. So what is there to do outside of combat? And perhaps the biggest part of the game is actually exploring the world itself. The world is split into a bunch of different areas that you travel to via portals. The main hub world is the city, and this is actually the only area in the game that you are able to change your portable team lineup. So when you leave the city, your portable team is locked as the 3 portables you have chosen until you return. I know how this sounds, but let me explain. Each new area comes with a side quest or 2 to do, as well as a bunch of platforming and puzzles. One of the most unique things about exploration is that it is somewhat dangerous. There are jumps, spikes, and other hazards around the place that do damage to your portable team should you fail them or run into them. The idea behind the team lock, I guess, is to give a extra bit of danger as well as to plan out your team strategy before entering a new area. In theory, I really like the idea behind this. It does feel like it gives the game a bit more of an identity. In reality though, a lot of the difficulty can be just bypassed by cheesing items, in particular health potions. And I think maybe if the player was locked to the amount of items that they could actually leave the city with in their belts or something like that, then the balance of this game could have been a lot more challenging. But I'm also kind of glad it isn't that way, because platforming in this game is not very good. The controls in this game are very precise, but that also means that they are also extremely stiff. And it makes the feeling of precision platforming a little awkward. And this game does require a lot of precision from you. And if you are just slightly off, you will fail a jump. And it's pretty unforgiving. Also, when you fall off a ledge, for some reason, you are unable to jump again for a second, but you can move, which led to me a lot of times trying to retry the jump immediately, only for me to fail again because I can't jump. Luckily, the punishment for failing jumps is pretty minimal, but it's a mild annoyance. While we're on the subject of controls, I would like to talk about the game's obsession with, pushing box puzzles. I don't mind that there are a lot of these puzzles in the game, but I do mind that the controls with them are very finicky. Because our character is so large in comparison to the boxes, it is so hard to kind of get on the right side of these things without accidentally pushing them. Now, you are able to pull boxes towards yourself by pressing an action key, but I often found myself unable to get the button prompt to do that to actually come up, which, because of the momentum problems with the movement, led me to pushing the box further away from where I needed while I was trying to grab it. These boxes also have the ability to reset themselves if you push them too hard into a wall or a jagged edge. The game just really doesn't like it, and the box will just kind of respawn back to its original position, which, oh god, is annoying. The box puzzles would be fine if the controls were better, and I hope the devs look into making this somewhat better, because a lot of the time these puzzles are, they're alright, but it is the controls letting it down. Which is a shame, because exploration is generally probably one of the highlights of the entire game, and because the controls of the game feel not right, it kind of brings down what I would call the best part of the game. Each area or map in the game is kind of absolutely filled to the brim with like collectibles, secret areas, and new things to discover later in the game as you go. The game fills each map with objects that you can interact with that will give you items if you do. And while this feels like it might be just kind of filling the map with just busy work to slow you down, it teaches the player to check every nook and cranny around the map. And you are often rewarded for doing this via like secret areas or hidden treasures, those kinds of things. Often story missions may reward you with an item that opens up new areas or quests in earlier maps that you visited. For example, about I think 10 hours into the game, you can acquire an item that lets you talk to statues. All of a sudden, you remember that there were statues in almost every earlier prior map in the game, and each of those statues can teleport you to major treasures, albeit for a price. I won't go into everything, but the game gets an impressive amount of use and reuse of its areas by doing this, which I think is great, but this is kind of a game that I wish I could have had a walkthrough handy in case I got stuck, because some of the places and areas they feel just a little too obscure to find or figure out by oneself. You know, it's not uncommon to find a puzzle or a hidden quest that you start, but you're unable to finish until you complete a part of a quest much later on down the line, or find a specific item that you won't find for a few hours later. And you'll often, kind of get yourself stuck trying to solve a puzzle that's unsolvable for now. So let's move on to the art style, which I think is absolutely great. It is in a retro pixel style, as I'm sure you've figured out by now. I don't really have anything bad to say about it. I think the game has a genuinely great sense of style. The sprite work on the portals and spells in particular look really good. Even the designs of the portals are really cool and varied. Each of the different biomes in the game also have very distinct designs, although I do wish that maybe they experimented a bit more with making the different areas in the same biome just a little bit different from each other, just to make them stand out a little bit more. But other than that, the art style in this game is almost flawless and I really liked it. The music in this game is also pretty good, but it suffers from that thing that most turn-based strategy games suffer from. When you start a battle, it will start the battle music track, and then when you leave a battle, it will start background music for that area. And in a game where you encounter battles quite regularly, you begin to hear the start of every song just kind of over and over. And so while I liked the compositions of the music, after a while I just had to kind of turn the music off just for my own sanity, because hearing repeating music starting and stopping, it does my head in. Alright, so it's time to talk about performance. This game did not run very well on my machine. This is something that I have been keeping an eye on because of my experience playing the game early, and while I think it's gotten a little bit better over the days playing, I don't think it's been properly fixed. So this started when I entered the Silent Woods area of the map, and the game began to have some major slowdown issues. This tended to happen in all of the larger areas of the game, but the game would just begin to run at unstable frames, and when the game would do this, it would affect other things like putting delays on being able to access menus, delaying quest rewards, highlighting NPCs and boxes to move those things wouldn't come up. If I tried to interact with any NPCs, dialogue boxes would take 5 seconds to appear, which wouldn't be the worst thing ever if it didn't happen between every text box whenever you tried to continue the conversation. Look, there is an option in the settings menu to turn off visual effects, which can alleviate the problems just a little bit. I never found it would fix it entirely. I have checked and rechecked areas of this game that I had problems in to begin with to see if it gotten better, and while it has a little bit, it never got fixed entirely. But considering my PC is, overkill for a game like this, I've got a 4070 Super. Computer doesn't struggle to run many games ever, so I have to speculate that this might have something to do with the game's engine, which is JavaScript as far as I'm aware of, which probably explains a lot. Now, the game's performance overall is one of the major reasons why this review didn't come out almost a week ago, as opposed to now on Portal Fantasy's launch day. And it's because, among other things, I needed to see what parts of the game got better over time. If you don't care about this part, then skip to the timecode on the screen and I'll give you my conclusions on the game. But I'm just going to go into, my experience playing this game. So what happened here? Well, I claimed the key for the game just over a week ago on the 8th of April, giving me a pretty decent head start on being able to play the game. But the state of the game I played was less than ideal. It's pretty normal to see bugs in a pre-release game, but it is abnormal to see the amount of bugs and general issues that I did during the first 2 days playing the game. And it got to the point where I just had to email the developers straight out and just ask them like, hey, is the current build of the game I'm playing on the version of the game that's going to be released to the public? I was almost expecting to, just be left on red, but they replied and they said no. They said that they're going to be updating it tomorrow, and that being April the 11th, and from there on that they will be testing and bug fixing the game until launch. So that was good, so I dropped the game and then just waited for the update to come around. And then it came around and my game stopped launching, which left me unable to play the game for another day. And then another update came and it would launch, but only to a black screen, so I couldn't do anything. But while I was getting into black screen on my main PC, I could launch the game on my Steam Deck. But the save file for my game didn't transfer over, so if I wanted to play the game or continue it on Steam Deck, I'd have to redo the 7 hours of the game I had already played, which, I didn't want to do. So after about 2 days, I was getting ready to write another email to ask, what the hell was happening. And the game started working again before I sent the email. And to be fair to the devs, after this point the game was working better than what I had initially experienced, but the further on into Portal Fantasy I got, the rougher the game felt. To the point where I felt like this game was totally unfinished and I would have to write, just a scathing review on the game. But every time I would kind of give up for the night, I'd come back the next day and the parts of the game where I experienced bugs and broken mechanics would be fixed. For example, the game has light puzzles that were just completely broken until one day they weren't and they started working as intended. Then I would progress further into the game and then something else would happen and, just rinse and repeat for the past week. This all came to a head when I encountered the dream world in the game, which the game had completely locked me out from progressing any part of the game any further. And this is where I kind of hit my breaking point and, emailed the devs again. This time asking, hey, look, I'm stuck in this area. Is this a bug or am I just too stupid to figure out some kind of vague puzzle in the game? To which I did get a reply saying that, the part of the game I accessed was a blocker that I probably shouldn't have been able to access. They patched the blocker, but because I had accessed that area, the data in my game was probably broken, which again, to the devs' credit, they offered to fix it for me if I wanted to by sending them over some files. I didn't take them up on that, partly because I had everything I kind of already needed to review the game, and also partly because one day the game was just fixed and I was just kind of able to progress. But, it was at this point of playing the game that I was out of time. All of the stuff that I experienced doesn't really explain why the game was in the state it was so close to launch. According to past updates on their Steam page and their non-updated itch.io page and FAQ on their Discord server, Portal Fantasy was initially meant to be a free-to-play online game with microtransactions and some kind of level builder element to the game. But 3 days before launch on April Fool's 2025, the game got delayed from its initial release of April 4th to April 16th. With the delay, there was an announcement that the game was being swapped to a premium-priced offline title with no microtransactions, and with PvP features to be added in the future. And because I started to look into this game after putting about 7 hours into it because the game just didn't quite feel right to play. But part of the reason I think like this game has performance problems might be because it was pivoted from an online game and maybe there's just a lot of code in there that needs to be taken out, or maybe optimization, I don't know. All that to say, I had a very unique experience playing this game. So if you've ever gone through and read Steam reviews, you've probably come across like that one review that says something along the lines of, I don't want to give this game a negative review or a positive review, but I have to because Steam doesn't have a middle ground option between positive and negative. And that's kind of how I feel after playing Portal Fantasy. I don't think this is an irredeemably bad game, but I don't think it is as good as it could be either. My experience with this game was pretty negative, but that is due to the sheer amount of bugs and the weird stuff that I encountered. But every time I would come across a bug that I for sure thought would be the end of my playthrough, the next day it would just be fixed and then I would keep going. What I think happened is that the developers of the game were testing and fixing the game in stages, and I just kind of happened to be in the areas that they were testing and trying to fix. So I was always experienced kind of like the worst state of the game every time. And look, I've never experienced something like this before, and a lot of those game-breaking problems are almost certainly fixed by the time this review drops, and I feel like they might polish a lot more stuff up over the coming days. And so a lot of the things that I experienced while playing this game are probably irrelevant by now, or they probably will be a few weeks down the line should the developers keep, working on this game and making it better. So let's pretend for a second that all of the bugs and softlocks that I encountered didn't happen. So what is the game that we're left with? The game we have still has some kind of very whack, sometimes abstract quest and puzzle design that's very hard to figure out by yourself. The game has a need for a lot of backtracking, and it has some very frustrating controls and sometimes just horrendous performance issues. But the world is so beautifully designed art-wise. The portable designs are also great, and the sprite work for the entire game is really fantastic. And it just makes the world feel so vibrant. The combat system is alright, along with the music, and the writing and overall progression systems, although they do have issues, they work fine for what they are. Which kind of leaves me sitting on the fence for this game. There is one thing that is kind of tipping me towards giving this a recommendation over not, and that is the price of the game. The game will be retailing at around $20 US, which is a pretty good price for the amount of content in this game. Despite my extremely mixed feelings on this game, it still got over 16 hours of game time out of me, and I feel like most other games I would have given up after the amount of problems I encountered, but I kind of just felt like I really wanted to play more of this one. I feel like I could have written more or less the same review at about 10 hours of game time than I did, putting the extra 6 to 10 hours that I did on top of that. I don't know how long this game actually is, so again, I asked the developers and they gave me an answer, and they said that the estimated time to finish the game's story with some general questing will take most players somewhere between 25 to 30 hours, with 100% completion taking much longer, somewhere up to double the game time. This is their words, not mine. I'm sitting around 16 to 20 hours at the moment. 16 hours of actual game time. The extra 4 was probably me trying to troubleshoot and try and fix things with the game as I was playing it. So, would I recommend this game? It is an extremely hesitant yes. It comes with some conditions. So, like, if you are willing to put up with some jank, and there is jank, then there is enough content here that is good enough to justify the price. And maybe on launch, or in a couple of weeks or months, some of the rougher edges of the game can get smoothed out. And if the developers keep doing the work, then I think this game could even be good or great. But I would only buy this game now if you are willing to handle some elements of the game that are just kind of less than ideal. And if you don't want to deal with that kind of stuff, then I recommend you give this game a pass for now, and then see how it's going after a few game patches. I think this would be an excellent option as a budget creature collector RPG, and even with its problems, it's still okay. That's all I have to say about Portal Fantasy, so thanks for watching this video. If you made it this far, then please consider leaving the video a like and subscribing if you haven't already. If you ended up playing Portal Fantasy, then let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. If there are any major changes to the game in the next few days, then I may give you an update date as a pinned comment below, so keep an eye out for that. Many thanks to my YouTube members, Controlled Killer, Yellow, Melodia, and Jingles, absolute legends. If you think my content is worth supporting with more than just a subscription, then you can do so as a YouTube member. Perks are on the screen, but if you want to do something that supports me that is free, then I also have a community Discord server that is free to enter, and a Steam curator page if you want to check that out. Links to everything else in the description of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.